What's going on, everybody? Good morning. We are back to the rookie grind. We've got more rookies to look at, and we're going to be today taking a shot with A.J. Barner, our next pick from the 2024 NFL Draft. Another fourth round selection for Seattle. This was another one that confused some people and I think disappointed some people in some ways, kind of like Tyrese Knight. Probably not to that extent because in the case of AJ Barner, people actually recognized this guy. They knew who he was. They um had positive recollections of him as a player because he had played for the national championship winning Michigan Wolverines in 2023. So they had a better idea of who he was. He was somebody that was spoken about a little more commonly in the pre-draft process as well. I certainly knew about him. Most people knew about him at least. But it wasn't a pick that people necessarily fell all over themselves for. But let's try to seek to understand what AJ Barner is bringing here, because he is bringing some very clear positive traits. And as always, we're going to start with just the numbers. We're going to start with the stats. We're going to start with the objective evaluation of what he did in college and what he might be able to do now based off what he did in college. So, AJ Barner spent the first 3 years of his collegiate career at Indiana, and then he transferred to Michigan in time to win the national title. So, the first 3 years were very different for him, but he did continue to show the kind of player that he was even as a Hoosier. So, keeping in mind that he spent the first 3 years at Indiana and only got to Michigan last year, let's take a look here. So, he's a tight end, like I said, 22 years old when the season starts. I think he just turned 22 a couple days ago. So, at 22 years old, that's younger than the average rookie, I think. He's taller than the average tight end. 6'6" is 85th percentile. He's not very heavy. He's about 251 pounds, which is 44th percentile. Offhand, I would expect him to probably add some weight in the NFL. He's actually not even average for a tight end in terms of his size. So I do expect him to bulk up a little bit. He does have longer than average arms, 33 and 3/8 inch arms, 65 percentile, tiny hands. And I am a little bit worried about that. Tiny hands, third percentile, 9 inchers. That's you don't see that very often on a tight end. I'm worried about what that could mean for him in the NFL because of the way that he'll probably play. Not particularly fast. By the way, these are all pro day numbers. He didn't do anything at the combine. 4.8, 440, 33rd percentile, so he's not fast. His vert and his broad were both pretty good. 67th percentile and 62nd percentile, respectively. So pretty explosive an athlete, I guess. His three cone was really nice. 7.02 three cone. 20-yard shuttle was more average. 4.41 is 41st percentile. And the bench press, 22 reps, 67th percentile. So he's stronger than the average tight end. So decent testing, nothing crazy stand out here except maybe his height. But overall, there's a clear use case for a player like this based off the numbers. You can pretty clearly see what's going on here. So let's take a look at his career. We're going to start with what he did in Indiana. In the COVID year 2020, he barely played. He played 5 games, 30 snaps combined. He got targeted once, and he actually dropped it. So he did not catch a pass. Basically, a complete nothing of a season. He got targeted once on a throw 2 yards past the line of scrimmage, and he dropped it. He did do some blocking. He lined up in line a vast majority of the time. A little bit wide. He never lined up in the slot, which is interesting. Usually you'd expect a tight end to line up in the slot way more than they line up wide. And when he was run blocking, it was always zone. Again, not that this really means anything because the sample size is so small, but interesting. And he was graded out really poorly because he didn't do any receiving, 46.8 grade overall. His blocking was okay, but it's all basically meaningless because the sample size is tiny. He didn't start playing more expansively until 2021, and he did become a more important piece of that Indiana offense. Still not really a full-time starter, though. Still not somebody who was being leaned on heavily. Playing 12 games in 2021. 228 snaps. So that's not even 20 snaps a game. So very much a part-time player. Got targeted 22 times and had 14 catches. So kind of a mediocre catch rate. 162 yards, 74 after the catch. So just under half of those yards after the catch and a touchdown. He also had a drop. Average depth of target was a little over 7.5 yards down the field. So not really a downfield threat. Not really somebody who's threatening defenses deep. He's just running a lot of short routes, and he's on the receiving end of a lot of shorter passes. As a pass blocker, he allowed 1 QB pressure on the season. It was only 9 pass block reps, though, so very small sample size there. And that was his first season as a meaningful contributor to Indiana, although obviously his role would expand a lot over the next 2 collegiate years. Mostly he was used as a pass blocker, 119 snaps, 100 as a run blocker, 9 as a pass blocker. 121 of his snaps came in line, and he played 76 snaps as a slot and 31 as a wideout. So he lined up relatively flexibly. He lined up all over the place for the Indiana offense. His run blocking, most of his reps came in zone, some of them came in gap. So through the first 2 years of his career, he was mostly being used as a zone scheme blocker. And then that brings us to his grades in 2021, which were just kind of okay. Receiving, okay. Pass blocking, okay. Run blocking, not even really okay, but overall just kind of a whatever player. Not much of an impact here. In 2022, takes a step forward, becomes a huge part of the Hoosiers offense. Plays only 10 games, 662 snaps. So he's playing over 65 snaps a game. Basically playing the whole game, which is impressive. In those games, he gets 49 targets. That's 5 targets a game. That's pretty legit. Now we're talking about a guy who's getting targeted a lot, but his catch rate is low. 28 catches on 49 targets. That's disappointing for a tight end who is getting targeted mostly on short passes. 199 yards receiving, 85 of them after the catch. So Yak is decent. Nothing over the top crazy, but reasonable. 3 touchdowns, 1 drop. 7.4 yard average depth of target, so he's just kind of getting targeted again, mostly shorter stuff. Allows 2 quarterback hits and 1 pressure on 44 pass blocking reps. So expanding himself out a little bit as a pass protector, not playing amazing or anything, but he doesn't allow any sacks, so it's all okay. Also commits 3 penalties. 369 of his reps came as a route runner, 249 as a run blocker, and 44 as a pass blocker. So that's, I think, what you would expect to see from a typical tight end in a typical offense. 350 of his snaps come in line, and 270 almost come in the slot. So he's seen a pretty good spread of different kinds of snaps. 29 snaps wide out, 15 in the backfield. So we're seeing him occupy many different roles. This year, Indiana starts running more gap runs, so Barner's on the field for 88 zone scheme runs, but 152 gap scheme runs. So things are starting to change a little bit. And he graded out really poorly, actually, because he was an inefficient receiver, and while the sample size is admittedly small, the pass blocking was really bad because allowing 3 pressures on 44 snaps is not going to win you any favors. So that was A.J. Barner through 3 years. Pretty unremarkable. Nothing that would probably get drafted. And then his life changed when he transferred to Michigan. So he goes to Michigan, and he plays for the national title-winning Wolverines, plays 15 games, 620 snaps. So he's still an important part of that offense, but he's not getting overworked like Indiana did. He's playing, little over 40 snaps a game? About 41, 42? That's okay. That totally works. He only gets targeted 32 times because Michigan is a run first, run second, run third team, but he improves his efficiency fairly dramatically. 22 catches on 22 catches on 32 targets. That's actually workable. 249 yards, so his production goes up significantly despite getting targeted a lot less. 107 yards after the catch, so still a pretty decent yak guy, nothing crazy. 1 touchdown, 2 drops, and his average depth of target expands out a little bit, but it's still just over 8 yards. So again, he's not threatening anybody deep down the field. He allows 3 QB pressures on his pass block reps, and he commits 3 penalties. So definitely getting better, and the way in which he is used changes dramatically. He only has 216 pass routes run. So he actually gets targeted on a decent share of his pass routes. He just doesn't run that many of them because he spends way more time run blocking. 350 snaps as a run blocker. That's almost, actually, excuse me, that's significantly more than half of his total snaps. That's not something you're probably going to see in the NFL. That's not something you even see for most college teams, but for Michigan, that's what they did because they wanted to run the ball. So 350 run block snaps is pretty crazy. 54 pass block reps. Lined up in line almost, I mean, I don't want to say almost exclusively, but a massive majority of the time. 480 snaps were in line, 82 in the slot. So he basically became a full-time inline tight end. And I think that's the big draw of this guy. He can do that. A lot of these modern tight ends, they need to line up in the slot constantly. Barner's not like that. He can line up in line all day. Still lines up as a receiver a decent amount, though. 52 wide out snaps. 3 as an offensive lineman, 2 in the backfield. Michigan mostly uses a gap-based running scheme this year, so 222 of his snaps are in run blocking snaps are in gap, and 111 are in zone. So you can kind of see how things changed over the course of his career, and by the end of it, he actually had significantly more experience doing gap scheme runs than zone scheme runs. And he was graded out really well this year for Michigan. You can see that pretty much everything improved to at least some degree here. 82.2 overall, almost a 70 rating, 81 run blocking, 62.3 pass blocking. It's all pretty good. It's all pretty workable. It's not amazing, but it works. It's functional, and it makes sense why this season elevated him to the point where he was considered draftable. And not so much so, he went basically in the middle of the draft. So you look at his career totals. You're not going to blow anybody away with these numbers, but you've got 42 games, over 1,500 snaps, got targeted over 100 times, 64 catches, 610 yards, 266 yards after catch, 5 touchdowns, 5 drops. Average depth of target is 7.5. So on the whole, he's not a very efficient receiver. He got targeted just over 100 times, had 5 drops. Now that's okay, but only 64 catches. But when you take a look at 2023 in particular, which was a year he actually had a capable quarterback, I'm not to go crazy with J.J. McCarthy, but he's certainly better than the guys he had at Indiana. It was better. So there's reason to believe that he's better than what he showed over his career. The 610 yards on 104 targets is obviously not going to excite anybody, but it's important to understand what we are dealing with here as a player. There is a reason why Michigan featured him so much as a run blocker and minimized his role as a pass receiver. Anyway, he allowed 2 hits and 5 pressures in his career on how many? 108 pass block snaps, which I think he improved on his pass blocking as time went on. Obviously, that 2022 those 2022 numbers were really bad, but pretty good by the end. 6 penalties, okay. 715 routes run, 717 run block snaps. So he ran block more than he ran routes, which is very rare for pretty much any tight end. Even blocking tight ends tend to run more routes than they actually block because there are just more opportunities to do so. Also had over 100 snaps as a pass blocker, almost 1,000 snaps in line, 426 in the slot, 117 wide, 3 as a straight-up offensive lineman, 17 in the backfield, and 400 snaps as a gap scheme run blocker, and 290 as a zone-based blocker. So, those are the numbers. They're not blowing anybody away. They're not super exciting. But the mistake people might make is looking at A.J. Barner as some dynamic receiver. He is certainly not. But what he brings in his area of expertise could be very good. More on that later. See you guys soon. Go Hawks.